Hello and many thanks for joining us. I'm Felicity Ezewike, your host. So last week we began a series in commemoration of the International Day for Universal Access to Information. It's billed for September 28. The day encourages stakeholders to reflect on the status of access to information and chart a way forward on its advancement. Like South Africa, Uganda was among the first African countries to enact a right to information law. That's the Access to Information Act 2005, and later they made the Access to Information Regulations 2011. Since then, a lot has happened. Let's keep a couple of years. Most people still remember the outcry over the internet shutdown just before the elections in 2021. Human Rights Watch, in its record of events of the year, said, the authorities in Uganda restricted rights to freedom of movement and assembly and violated rights to freedom of association and expression. Speaking during last year's commemoration, the then Speaker of Parliament, Jacob Ulaya, who passed away in March, was of the view that the Freedom of Information law has served the elite at the expense of the uneducated rural populace, even though activists argue that Parliament has not played its oversight function to ensure that the law is implemented as envisaged in 2005. Meanwhile, between 2020 and 2021, there was about 1.1% drop in public perception of overall governance in Uganda, according to the Ibrahim Index of African Governance. When freedoms are being violated, and a study suggests that access to information and its flow mechanisms from the Ugandan government to the people is inimical to the practice of good governance, one is not overly surprised. Should we believe what data tells us about governance and access to information in Uganda? If yes, how do we discuss good governance in the face of documented disregard of the provisions of the law? It's a tough nut today. My guest is the Executive Director, Africa Freedom of Information Center, Uganda, Mr. Gilbert Gandua. Since 2010, he has championed citizens' access to information, open contracting, and open government across Africa. Gilbert previously worked with Transparency International, International Labour Organization, Uganda Law Society, and Save the Children, among other. Thank you very much for joining us, Gilbert.
Thank you very much, Felicity. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Exactly. It's a pleasure to have you with us in one slot today. Let's just get right off by getting an understanding of what Africa Freedom of Information Center does. Tell us what you do there.
Yes, thank you very much. The Africa Freedom of Information Center is the largest and leading civil society network of organizations that promote the right to information, transparency, and accountability across Africa. We have a membership of 47 civil society organizations in 24 African countries. So we basically work across the continent on transparency and accountability, the right to information, and also transparency and accountability.
All right, give us an overview. I know your center produced a report on the state of access to information across Africa. You released it during the last commemoration. Can you give us maybe the highlight of that report? And will there be another report this year?
Yes, thank you very much. Access to information by citizens is very, very important because it separates, information separates access to public services provided by government and people. When people have information, it's possible for them to, know the services governments are providing, to know how much it costs, to know when this service should be provided, and how much of this service. Unfortunately, in many African countries, you find that citizens do not have access to public information. And as a consequence, they don't get access to services, even though government would have paid for these services. I'll give an example here in Uganda, where for 2 years in one of the communities in Masaka district, people had been told that there was no medicine for malaria, simply because, according to the health workers, government was not supplying these medicines. But following training of citizens, a woman called Margaret made an information request. She simply wanted to know, in the past 12 months, how many times government had delivered medicine and how many doses in each of the deliveries. To her surprise and shock, she learned that government had regularly supplied medicine on a quarterly basis. And in fact, according to her, even if there had been an epidemic, medicine would have been enough. But they were being told, the whole community, that there was no medicine because government was not delivering. This is one of the many examples of what happens when the public lack access to information. So,
I'm actually, is this part of what your submission was on your report for last year? Because I want to get an understanding of what you do at the center before we jump on to talk about specifically what's happening in Uganda. So could you tell us a bit what the report focused on? I think it was the state of information access across Africa that was produced last year.
Yes, the report was assessing the status of public access to information within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals 16.10.2, and also within the context of the African Union treaties, the 6 treaties of the African Union that recognize and guarantee the right to information for every individual in Africa. We therefore sought to establish, number one, what is the status of ratification of African Union treaties on access to information? Number two, how far has each government gone in as far as pursuing the realization of SDG 16.10.2? We looked at whether or not a country had passed access to information laws, whether or not they had established systems and procedures for implementing the right to information within an agency, including systems for receiving and responding to information requests in a timely basis. We looked at whether or not agencies were proactively disclosing information and whether or not they were undertaking promotional measures to make sure that citizens understand their right to information and how they can exercise it by making information requests. What we found was that, first of all, there is no such a thing as a government implementing the right to information. What do we mean? We found that within the same countries, some agencies were performing far much better than others, that some would be doing very well on proactive disclosure, being committed to receiving and responding to information requests, and also reporting on how the measures they are taking to implement this right. On the other hand, in the same countries, you'd find that agencies were doing so poorly that they were deliberately refusing to disclose information proactively. They were not responding to information requests, and in fact, they would be hostile whenever citizens would request for information. We also looked at the state of compliance with Article 62 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights regarding state reporting to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, especially in respect to Article 9 on access to information. We found that quite many countries, unfortunately, were behind with state reporting. Some were behind by 7 reports, which means 14 years. Some were behind by 5 reports, some were behind by 2 reports.
Okay, so let me just, you obviously have these figures at the tip of your fingers, and we obviously, and I know if I let you, you will give us more details, but I needed to get that basis set because this conversation is basically about the International Day for Universal Access to Information. So of that report for last year, what was the perception you got as regards access to information in Uganda?
Yes, in Uganda, we found mixed reactions. For example, we found a number of public officials recognizing that information held by public agencies belongs to the people and that citizens are only custodians of this information. Some of them also felt that it was very important for citizens to access this information and use it for their development, while others actually felt that this was government information and therefore people had no business in accessing this public information. So we found mixed reactions in that regard.
Okay. Is it a lack of understanding of the law? Before we go there, tell us about some of the key points of that law that they have. It is the information, access to information regulations 2011. I think that's the current one in use. Could you tell us some of the highlights? Is there maybe a misunderstanding of what the Access to Information Act stands for?
Yes, the Constitution in Article 41, but also the Access to Information Act and the regulations all recognize that every Ugandan, every citizen of Uganda, be it a body, a registered entity, or a normal human being, natural human being, has the right of access to information, which should be given to them by public officials. It also states that this information should be proactively disclosed without the necessity of people asking for information. It also requires and obligates public officials to respond and provide information within 21 days when citizens request for this information. It provides for duty to assist requesters, including people who may not, be able to express themselves in the official language English, people with disabilities, and others.
Okay.
The law also requires that every minister on annual basis must submit to Parliament an access to information annual report. It states that where an information request, that is an information request, one information request has been denied, that the minister should explain to Parliament why that information has been denied.
We will take time to explore some of that. I mean, the parliamentary part of it, from what I have read, except maybe there are new developments I'm unaware of, there's been no acknowledgement by ministers. They've not been doing that regularly, have they? They've not.
Yes, unfortunately, our report finds that there is no minister who has complied with this requirement, Section 43 of the Act, to file annual reports to Parliament. We are talking about the time since 2005 up to date. There is no single minister who has complied with legal obligation.
Okay.
And unfortunately also, the representatives of the people, the members of Parliament, have not required the ministers comply with this important obligation, because it should not be, up to the ministers to decide to comply or otherwise. When they are not doing this, it is an expectation, or should be an expectation, of Parliament to require them to comply with the law.
Okay, that takes me to the next question I was looking at. Is there any fuzziness, any part of the law that is unclear, that allows for interpretation, bogus interpretation, that allows these people to ignore it without any repercussion?
I mean, unfortunately, the law provides for sanctions for officers who falsify records, for officers who destroy records, for officers who conceal records, but it does not make it an offense for officers who fail to comply with the law by way of responding to information requests. And indeed, this is one of the recommendations that we made to Parliament, that this act should be amended, provide for sanctions for officials who do not comply with the obligations to disclose information either on a proactive basis or upon receiving information requests.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Unfortunately, the law says that when you are not satisfied, either by way of not receiving information that you need, you should go to court. This is a very uphill task for many Ugandans because courts are not accessible by many Ugandans. They are not affordable by many Ugandans, and courts are, people have even to walk very long distances to access courts. So to say that people should complain.
People are more worried about the food that they will eat and how they will survive the next day. But of course, knowing this is important, and we'll get to a point where I will reference some of your comments on the need, how beneficial it is for the government to, take giving citizens access to information, how it will improve governance. But for now, I want you to speak on, I think you actually concord that the information flow to the people is not as it should be. Majority of citizens are not aware of the right to information, let alone the procedures for accessing information and data held by public bodies. What's your take? Can you just expand on this conversation for us?
Yes, we found that many citizens are not aware of their right to access public information and how to access information under the law, information held by ministries, departments, and agencies. To our surprise also and shock, we found that in our study that even government officials were not aware of the existence of this important access to information legislation and also corresponding obligations of these officers to disclose this information. And we found this very problematic. And in fact, also another concern we found the same officers who are supposed to implement, receive requests and disclose information are also mandated to be public relations officers. Now, this is a big challenge because public relations officers are supposed to paint like a positive image, even when things may not be right within an agency. Okay. While the Access to Information Act is an accountability tool. So fusing these responsibilities into one person, in our view, should not be the case.
Okay, time is already running on us. I just looked up now and we're already 18 minutes in. So let's quickly look at whose responsibility is it truly to educate the people. They're concerned about food. Let me just jump ahead and say, I saw on one of the portal that is supposed to be where people ask for information. You see people looking for job. Unemployment is very high. So whose responsibility is it to educate the citizens that they have a right to ask for certain things? Do they have a right to ask for jobs as well?
Yes, it should be the responsibility of every government agency, ministry, department, and agency to disclose information they have and also inform people how they can access this information, because there is a lot of value for government, not only for citizens, but also for government agencies to disclose information. And therefore, since there is a benefit, especially building trust, accounting to the public for these agencies and the leaders that lead them, it is important that they make it a priority for them to sensitize the people. Beyond this, the Constitution also mandates the Uganda National Human Rights Commission to promote rights, including building civic competencies. So the Human Rights Commission is also mandated by law to do this, but unfortunately, this has not been done. And the main reason they say is because they are not sufficiently funded to implement this important mandate.
Okay.
Other bodies, like the Electoral Commission, being custodians of electoral laws that facilitate people's participation in their governance, should also have an obligation and make it an important duty to sensitize the public on their right to inform access information that is related to elections, and also how they can access this information when it has not been proactively disclosed.
Okay.
You will know that in many countries, Uganda inclusive and other African countries, there has been dissatisfaction with elections, and many times this has resulted into conflict and unfortunately death and destruction of property.
All right, and let's hold it. Let's hold it where you're talking about what government is doing. They don't seem to be doing enough. We'll just take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll be exploring what Ugandan government is doing to improve access to information, whether it's enough. I'll see you in a bit.
Thank you very much.
Good to know you're still with us. I still have Mr. Gilbert Sendugwa. In 2014, the Ugandan government published the Ask Your Government website to facilitate requests for government information to help citizens get the information they want from public authorities. But where I'm concerned is in a country where internet access is often interrupted, what's your assessment of how efficient that website is in helping increase access to information?
Yes, the establishment of this portal was a very good move by the Office of the Prime Minister to facilitate public access to information, because from experience, we see that one information request can change lives. Can help people access services, can result into good policies, can help to curb, abuse of public resources. So it's very important. And therefore, when you have as many people as possible making requests, it helps, government to perform better in providing services to the public. Now, the unfortunate bit is that many of the requests on this portal go unanswered. And some of them, the answers come very late. So it is important that government officers remain committed and engaged to responding to information requests.
Is there a way to prompt quicker action? Because the whole essence of the portal is to enhance easier access to information. Already we know, I don't want to harp on it because I discussed it last week about the fees that needs to be paid. Citizens are already struggling, but they still sometimes need to pay to access this information. So what needs to be done really beyond saying they should do more? Is there something that centers like yours can do to expedite action towards responding to requests on the portal?
Yes, we have been engaging government, and in fact, the Minister of State for National Guidance, the Honorable Kabyanga, has welcomed our feedback and promised that they are going to require government agencies to be compliant. We also engaged with Parliament and the Right Honorable Speaker, Kadaga, and later on the Right Honorable, now departed, Jacob Boranya, also required and in fact pushed this matter to the Committee of Parliament to suggest measures that can be done to ensure that there is greater compliance with providing citizens with timely access to information. Now, broadly, agencies do not provide information either because they lack capacity and resources or because they lack the will. Now, but the issue of capacity, can result into delays, but not, outright refusal or complete silence to these requests.
Okay.
So we would like to request that each of the leaders of government agencies take this very seriously and respect the law. Agencies like the PPDA, which is the Oversight Agency for Public Procurement, have been very good in providing example by proactively disclosing and facilitating disclosure of procurement information. They have trained procurement officers on how to disclose information. They have put a portal, the government procurement portal, where thousands of contracts have been published. And also, the requests that we have made to the PPDA have been promptly responded to, all of them. So I think many other agencies should learn from PPDA and follow suit. Another agency is the Uganda National Roads Authority, which also initially was not responsive to information requests, but after training and engaging them and understanding why it is important for citizens to access information, beyond this being a duty and obligation of public agencies, UNRWA is also now one of the most compliant agencies in terms of disclosing information.
Okay, so let me jump in quickly and ask about, because all of this sounds great. We're talking about that Ask Government and Get Access, the website. But what is the level of penetration of internet access in Uganda? Because if people don't have access to the internet where they can make their request, the whole point of having websites that furnish you with information becomes redundant, isn't it?
Yeah, you see, Felicity, it is important that various channels are used to enable people access information. Like I said, a single request changes lives. And this can be lives of people in rural communities or in urban areas. So, and having multiple channels is very good because, yes, the majority of the Ugandans do not have access to the internet, but you find that those who have, especially youth, are very active and use this platform to access information, which then is channeled to the public. Even journalists do the same. Now, yes, access to internet is still low, but government has been making very strong strides in connecting all government offices across the country with internet. And in fact, it is their goal that within the next 5 years, all districts and sub-counties should have access to the internet. And they have been laying fiber optic, to reach these places. Now, the problem is that the cost is very high because, in Uganda, the cost of internet has gone up quite significantly and is not affordable by many citizens. So while we applaud the efforts of government to extend the internet, they need also to look at the issue of affordability. They need to lower the cost of internet.
Okay, let's talk about, we're talking about internet, so let's talk about digitization. There have been instances, I think I saw that some people ask for information and they will be referred to the physical office. They can't get this information digitally. So does that imply there is still some issues with digitization and storing technology in storing information that people can easily access? Where is Uganda at when it comes to digitization of these information?
Yes, there is a lot of information that is not accessible digitally. And in fact also, many government agencies still insist on providing hard copies of documents, even when the UN Human Rights has guided that the same rights people enjoy offline, they must enjoy online. But we find it strange and quite disturbing that many government agencies require that people should access information in hard copies. An associated issue is that agencies like the Uganda Electoral Commission have sometimes required people to pay 30,000, 300,000, 500,000 for documents.
What was the rationale for insisting? Sorry, Gilbert. sorry to interrupt, but I just needed to get that clarity. What's the rationale for insisting that they must print hard copies when the information can be done, transmitted electronically where it is available?
Yes, of course, the issue is one way to deny access or to frustrate efforts of requesters, especially when they are asking about, accountability issues. When someone is asking for, how money was spent, evidence of contracts or what was paid for what, they always create, these excuses. We have in my office, for example, a response from the National Drug Authority, the National Medical Stores, which responded to our request saying that, yes, we can access that record, but we need to pay 10 million shillings. 10 million shillings. That is over $4,000 access a record.
That is a lot of money.
Yes. Now, for a citizen who is struggling to, buy food, for someone who is acting in the public interest to, make sure that these agencies are accountable or explain, for example, why in spite of receiving billions, there is no medicine, being asked to pay $4,000 is really an act to frustrate the requester.
That is so true. While we're still talking about digitization and efforts to suppress, but people that really want this information, I guess they will be pulled out. Governance is affected if you don't know what's happening and you can't access information. It means that the situation will not improve. Let's go back to internet access for a bit. Uganda is known to every once in a while shut down the internet. We know what happened during the elections last year. Is there a provision in the law that allows such, blatant authoritarianism? Too much English. If not, is any being considered? Is there any law being considered to stop the government from doing this consistent shutdown of internet?
Yes, this is quite concerning and disturbing because every time internet is shut down, it's not just an act of shutting down internet. It affects, people's ability to access services. It affects their ability to market their products. It affects their ability to understand what is taking place around them. So it's a major issue of concern. And like you have rightly said, in the past 2 elections, we have seen government, shut down internet without, indiscriminately shutting out internet. As we speak, Facebook is officially switched off in Uganda for more than a year since the last presidential election. So you can see these occurrences are not only frequent, but they are also arbitrary. One of the reasons, not for shutting down Facebook, but for total shutdown of internet, government has been raising security concerns. But then, they are not verified, they are not audited, nobody has really, and people on the street.
Are civil society organization asking questions here? What have you found out as to where did they derive the power from to shut down the internet? Because that's like, when we talk about information, that's like the engine house in this day and age.
Yes, unfortunately, there is no legal provision that mandates government to arbitrarily, shut down the internet without explanation. But unfortunately, we haven't seen a corresponding duty of government to explain to the public why they felt compelled to
has that I'm trying to find out if that decision has been challenged at any point, because I know that civil society, like for instance in Nigeria, we know when the government acts in a certain way, there are some civil organizations. The one that comes to mind quickly is SERAP, So that will take the government to court and ask, why are you doing this? So do we have such scenario in Uganda?
Unfortunately, the issue of, yes, I should say that a number of times, cases have been brought to court, not only related to, internet shutdowns, but issues around democratic dispensation and the rights of citizens. But unfortunately, the decisions of court have not been inspiring. Secondly, the decisions of court have taken so long. For example, the first ever case on access to information to be brought court in 2010, the court ruled against the journalists who had made an information request. These journalists were not satisfied and appealed in 2010. Up to now, the appeal has never been scheduled for hearing. So you can see this becomes a major disincentive for civil organizations to raise matters to court, where you have courts that do not see it, as instruments or for citizens, to express themselves, to effectively participate or question decisions that appear to undermine their democratic participation.
I mean, how does one even begin to discuss good governance in the face of this blatant disregard for freedoms? That is the knot we will be untying after this very short break. That's the crux of the question I'll be asking. How do we move forward and ensure that people in Uganda get better access to information to improve their living? Join us again. To the big question of the day for me, how can we discuss good governance in the absence of access to rights as we see in Uganda? Gilbert, how do we begin to do that?
First of all, we have to understand that rights are not given, and therefore every citizen must work towards claiming their right. People do not get what they deserve, but what they negotiate. The act of being a citizen, not a subject, means that there are certain things that you have to do, forcefully to be able. I'm not talking about being physical, but
I mean, we could. Are there legal options? Let's start from there. Are there legal options that can be explored to compel government to do the right thing? And it's a little discouraging because in one breath, the government say they want to provide access to information. In another breath, they are making efforts to stop that same access that they are claiming with these portal websites and all the talk. So what are the legal options? I think that's where we can start from for people to push the Ugandan government.
There are legal options for dissatisfied citizens to go to court and challenge denial of access, whether it is mute, that means the agency has kept quiet, or they have said they have misinterpreted the provisions of the law. So under Section 37 of the Access to Information Act, they can appeal to court, and then the court can hear, although like I said, in many cases, most of these cases on access to information have taken quite too long. Secondly, they can actually also go to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and lodge complaints. They can make shadow reports and be heard. Again, there are costs associated with this. Many citizens are not aware of these mechanisms, but also for some of them, like the African Court on Human and People's Rights, there are some obstacles there that first of all, government needed to have made a special declaration allowing citizens and CSOs to bring cases direct to court, which then leaves the only route to the African Court on Human and People's Rights through the African Commission, which then can decide to bring a case to the court on behalf of citizens. Again, a very long journey. There's also another legal hitch, which requires that national or local remedies be exhausted or provide evidence that the state was unwilling or unable to adjudicate, or the environment was so harsh that these cases could be heard nationally to exhaust local remedies. So in a way, there is a lot of obligations and obstacles that are put on right holders, even when these remedies exist.
Okay, I think there are other ways as well. You even alluded to some of them. In a piece you authored not so long ago, you said something instructive I'd like you to expand a little on. You said that public access to information is as important for public officials as it is for the ordinary citizens in various ways. I want you to explain this. Why should government work harder, especially in Uganda now, to improve access to information? What is the gain for them, despite, the scrutiny that they will face?
Yes, first of all, every year, government goes to the public and they make commitments, to provide this or other services, and therefore they borrow and also collect revenue and appropriate it to provide these services. Now, in the absence of oversight, as the case that I gave in Masaka of medicine, when there is no access to information, government loses money, and they don't know that actually money is being lost.
Okay, I think the network has interrupted. Gilbert, can you hear us? If you're just joining us, we're about rounding up. The network is acting up, but we're talking about improving access to information and good governance, specifically today in Uganda. We're doing this in commemoration of the International Day for Universal Access to Information that's billed to be celebrated on September the 28th. The day is set aside to encourage conversation like this to see how we can improve access to information across all units in Africa. We've been talking about it. The case of Uganda is worrisome. The case of Uganda is, in one breath they say they have portals for people to get in and ask questions, and then you don't get a response even when you do ask the questions. I think I have Gilbert back now. Gilbert, can you conclude on your thoughts quickly?
Yes, so I was saying that there is great value in government disclosing information because the services reach the people. That's number one, because there's better oversight by citizens. There's better understanding of government policies, and therefore they follow them, and better rule of law when people get it. So that helps the government in a great way. We have seen strong strides in procurement where government has been more open. So government should really take interest and implement the Access to Information Act, because that is going to be of great value for government, but also for citizens.
Okay, one other thing you mentioned I'd like you to, we're looking for solution on one slot all the time. So no matter how small it seems, we will grab it. One thing you mentioned again in that piece was probably you said it's probably the most crucial benefit to accessing information, that there will be an increase in trust between citizens and government. How can that be made possible for Uganda?
Yes, in fact, in Uganda, each year, the Anti-Corruption Agency makes, perception surveys. And you find that within the same government, the levels of trust are miles apart. There are agencies which are quite strongly trusted, while there are those that, are not trusted because they don't give out information, or because they are perceived differently. So access to information helps to build trust. And agencies like courts, the judiciary is perceived to be very corrupt, police to be very corrupt. And then you find others on the other side, like districts, local governments, they fare quite fair. So it really helps to disclose information. And we have seen where for the agencies that are disclosing information, there are greater benefits, there's greater trust by members of the public.
I mean, I wish we had more time to continue, but I think you have been able rather to shed some light on the way forward to increase access to information in Uganda. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Gilbert Ndugwa, ED Africa Freedom Center, for spending your time and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for hosting me, and thank you very much, dear viewers and listeners. It's been a great pleasure being with you, and look forward to the next discussion. And happy International Day for Universal Access to Information.
Gracias. So access to information is definitely not an elitist request anymore. We've moved beyond that. It's now a necessity, a right. And also, it is bare courtesy for citizens. From what we've heard today, there are steps being taken across the continent to increase access to information. Dialogues are being had. But how satisfying is the progress being made? More needs to be done, especially Uganda. Uganda can, Africa can. We can. I have faith. Be sure to watch a repeat of one slot on News Central YouTube channel. Use the comment section to share your thoughts on the way forward. And don't forget to subscribe while you are there for Everything Africa. Thank you again for watching. I will see you next time.